This is a Viva PR podcast.
Go for something that you feel passionately about, because I think that does help with that drive. We're not blaming anyone in the north, that's not what it's about. A lot of this is beyond people's control. The cost in terms of lost productivity as a result of the ill health of people in the north, it's huge numbers. Our work lands on the desks of policymakers and people who can actually enact the change that we're campaigning for.
Hello and welcome to PR in the Real World with me, Tony Garner. Here's a question for you. How do you go about shifting an entire nation's thoughts around something as big as health inequality? In PR, we often talk about awareness, coverage and reach, but sometimes our work goes beyond that. It's mission driven. And that's exactly what this episode is all about. We're looking at why a postcode can determine how long you'll live. This is the story of a comms team that doesn't just chase headlines. They're focused on turning the heads of policymakers because ultimately their goal is to help change lives. Ruth Boston, Head of Communications at the Northern Health Science Alliance and Health Equity North, joins us to share how a small but fiercely dedicated team turns detailed academic research into campaigns that shift policy by making waves in Westminster. We talk about the strategies, the stats and the storytelling that underpin a team's work and what Ruth reveals might change how you think about PR's real power. Let's hear from Ruth. So, Ruth, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, can you walk us through your career journey? I mean, I know you started as a regional journalist, but now you're head of comms in a health research organisation. Walk us through your career today.
So as you mentioned, I did start off as a journalist at a regional publishers. So there was 3 papers that were produced from the office, and it was 2 dailies and a weekly. I started off there in my early 20s and as a trainee, kind of worked my way up to a senior multimedia journalist there, covering all aspects of news. So it was a very fast-paced job. It kind of gets you very much used to working in a certain way and very much to deadline, because we still went to print in the morning for one of those publications. So it was a great kind of eye-opener to that kind of publishing media world. And I was there for about 5 years before I then took the step moving to a communications agency, which was one based in Newcastle, which was brilliant. Worked on a wide range of clients, everything from kind of transport, business, and a lot of public health stuff, which is where that interest first came for me. And I eventually decided to move into the freelance world, which was a bit of a leap of faith, but I had an opportunity to take on a client, and it was brilliant, to be honest with you. I did that for a few years, and during that time I started working with a few health-focused clients, one of which was the Northern Health Science Alliance, who I now work for now. So I was supporting them as a consultant for a couple of years before I took the job kind of in-house with them, and that's where I came to be.
So tell us about the Northern Health Science Alliance for our listeners who won't be aware of what it is and the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, so the Northern Health Science Alliance we're a membership organisation and very much focused on health research and health innovation. And our members include 10 research-rich universities from across the whole of the North and 9 NHS trusts. So it's very much, our purpose is to bring together that expertise and excellence within health research and to share ideas, to convene networks and try and create a louder noise by speaking as one voice together. So whether that be kind of advocating for the North in terms of our strengths, trying to secure more investment in the region in health research, also coming together to deliver research projects together. So a lot of our work focuses around that health inequalities angle. So we have a few networks that we work across and a few key program themes, and that's one that's kind of developed and grown a life and legs of its own. And that's when we launched it's Health Equity North, which is a virtual health institute, and we deliver all our health inequalities research through that arm of the organisation.
So tell us about the kind of comms aspect and the size of the team and the different roles of the people who might be involved in that.
From the comms perspective, we're quite a small team. I'd say we're small but mighty, because we do. I think for a very small team, we pack quite a strong punch, and we get really good engagement and outcomes, and that's something I'm really proud to be part of. So there's myself and my colleague Alexis, who is head of public affairs, so she leads on all the policy side of things, and then there's a communications manager, Charlotte, and we have an in-house designer, Sean. We're bringing in more support as we speak, actually, because there's just so much work for us to do. So we work very, very close knit. So on every project, regardless of whether it's a report or more kind of corporate comm stuff that we're doing, we're very closely integrated. We meet and discuss things regularly. We plan, and it's all kind of, it's very aligned, our messaging, to make sure that we have the greatest impact from the kind of media side of things, as well as the policy stuff.
You mentioned impact there. So what does kind of good look like? What are you trying to achieve?
Well, our key, obviously, it's media coverage for us, and it's making sure that our work lands on the desks of policymakers and people who can actually enact the change that we're campaigning for. So that is pretty much how we summarise whether, do you know what, this has been a great campaign because, do you know what, it's been mentioned X amount of times in Parliament. We've had, someone held a Westminster Hall debate on it. We got on kind of BBC News throughout the day from morning till kind of news at 10. That's kind of how we measure that impact, and they go hand in hand. The more media we get, the more attention you get from MPs and ministers and things like that. So it's kind of, if we can align those things and make sure we have that kind of solid impact across the board, then it gives us the greatest impact.
Can you take us inside one of your kind of recent campaigns? I know you very recently launched the Aging in the North campaign. How do you take an idea like from the research and then get it into a state where the media are going to be interested?
Well, it's a long process. So as I mentioned, the Northern Health Science Alliance, we have lots of what we call expert networks. So that's from everything from child health, AI, data, medtech, all these different themes that we focus on by bringing together representatives from each of our members who are experts within that area, and meet regularly to discuss priorities, what work they're currently doing, what work could be done, what would be relevant now to resonate with policymakers. And it's from the Healthy Aging, or the Aging North Network, as we call it, that this idea was born with amongst the academics from the universities that we work closely with. So that seed of the idea came from that, and then it's grown and developed. And there was lots of academics who contributed to this. It was a really big task, and it's been going on for months and months, led by my colleague Mandy. And the comms and public affairs aspect, we were brought in quite early on. So for the last 5 or 6 months or so, we've been involved in the regular meetings and catch-ups, so we can understand as that research is being done and the findings are kind of drip feed, and then we can have a look at that and we can start to formulate a plan about how that's going to look in terms of the comms and the public affairs, and then we build the campaign and the comms plan around that. So it's a very long process, as you can imagine. This research takes time, and a lot of these, the academics are doing this on top of their day jobs as well. So it's an immense amount of work and effort from everyone involved. And then we get that, once we get the copy for the report, we can then go through, we pull out the bits that we think will be the most hard hitting and appealing for the media and the policy perspective. And a lot of the front end of these reports is kind of all those nuggets that have been pulled out from the nitty gritty of the main chapters that are the key findings. And we like to do 60-second summaries, which kind of sums up what the report's about in that quick bite-sized things, because that's what MPs want, that's what ministers want, that's what the media want, to get that hook. It's kind of selling it like that, and then you can delve deeper. So the reports cover quite a few audiences in that regard. It's the academic and the health research audience can get all the detail from the chapters, and then the front end is the kind of the highlights and the impactful stuff that will hopefully get the attention of the media and policymakers.
So tell us, in this instance, the Aging in the North report, pull out some of the kind of like, I didn't know that kind of figures that would be of interest to our listeners, I guess.
I guess a lot of what it's telling us is that growing older in the north, it's not equal. Growing older isn't equal across the country. Older people in the north live shorter lives. They live less of those years in good health. Not having access to good food. It's poverty. Obviously, poverty is much higher in the north, and that's their job market. That's the same for the older population as well. A lot more people retire. So it's all these wider things that start from being a child that impact what you're going to be like when you're older, and how long you're going to live, and in what state, how much money you're going to have in the bank is all shaped from really early on. So much, even though this report focuses on the older population, it's very much about children as well, because that's where it starts, and that's where we want people and policies to focus on that kind of life course approach.
Yeah, the seagulls were joining in as you were. I'll have to tell listeners that Ruth's dialing in from a home on the northeast coast near Whitley Bay, if you're interested. So when you get this kind of data, it must be like for you really interesting to try and unpick messages and really kind of understand what's being said and how you can package it in a way that's going to land and resonate.
Oh, definitely. And I think I'm not an academic, I'm not a statistician, that's not my area of expertise, but actually looking through and seeing just there's an overwhelming amount of information in these reports that come through. So it's quite difficult picking the ones that are going to land. But also sometimes it's very much about asking questions of the research team to find out if there's different ways we can phrase that, or saying, look, this is showed in a percentage, but could we do this as, one? And so, there's different ways to kind of change a statistic to make it more compelling and make it mean more to a regular person who might not understand data in the same way. So we always approach it from that perspective of trying to simplify, but not take away from the messaging, but just to make it more digestible, because then we know that that'll have the greatest impact. But also making sure, which it always does because we work with brilliant academics, but making sure that, these are solid facts. So the BBC, they'll fact check things. They want to make sure, they'll want to understand the workings out. Where's that come from? And, everything's rock solid that we put out.
So you obviously, academics will, like you say, love the detail. And do they ever push back? If you're simplifying too much, if you're taking this complexity and trying to unpick it in a way that the media and the MPs are going to understand?
Yeah, I think most of the time, we work really well with them and they understand what we're trying to do. And as long as everything stands up and it's not misrepresenting what the figures are saying, then that's fine. But and it's getting that balance, because we don't want things to be so depressing and shocking that it's kind of like, oh gosh, this is like another story about how terrible it is living in the north and the kind of inequalities we have. But we've got to highlight that, but also by mixing it in with the solutions as well. So I think it's getting that balance, and I do think a lot of, because we've been doing this for some time and we've developed and put out and published a lot of reports, and there's an understanding amongst the research teams that we work with of what this looks like, and they know that certain things can help us get a greater impact, and it makes sense to kind of package them in a way that appeals to those audiences. We want MPs to stand, when they're talking in Parliament, to cite some of our stats, which they do, and they can do that if it's written and delivered to them in a way that they can remember and that's digestible.
Stats are very impactful, as we know, but what you really need to do as well when you're storytelling is connect with emotions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And through sometimes telling the stories through the eyes of real people as well. How important are personal stories alongside the statistical output, do you think?
Oh, incredibly important. So where possible, we always try to incorporate that lived experience voice in the reports. And it delivers a message in a different way, because these statistics, they are that, but there's people behind them, and it's making people understand the reality of those statistics for the people who are living in poverty, who can't necessarily afford to go out and buy, healthy food, or, whatever, or they've been forced out of the workforce due to their ill health. So that's incredibly important. And we know from a comms perspective and a media perspective that can really elevate a story and make it much more compelling and much more likely to secure particularly broadcast at a national level. So by way of an example, the Children in Care Child of the North APPG report that we did, we worked really closely with some organisations in the North who support women who've experienced of child removal, and they were brave enough and willing to share their personal stories, which is, it's a very sensitive subject, but by them sharing that, it really opened up the report on the wider story from a media perspective, because they were happy to speak to the media. They came down and were involved in the launch as well in Parliament. So it really kind of hits home, and it makes a lasting impression, I think, on people, so they're more likely to remember the data and the statistics behind it.
And I guess it's another thing that you give in the media as well, that that they're looking for these real life stories to go alongside these reports, aren't they?
Definitely. And we know from dealing with the media day in, day out what they want, and if we can go to them and say, look, we've got this report, but we've also got this person who's ready and willing to speak, then they love that, they appreciate that, because a lot of the time they'll go and have to do that legwork themselves if they want to. So as much as we can kind of give to the media, it kind of makes it more likely to be covered, and it also creates a better relationship as well with those journalists, who then think, you know what, they kind of really helped turn this around, they provided us with this. It really strengthens those relationships, those long-term relationships with media.
You've been working with the Alliance a while now. Has there ever been like stats or reports that have really surprised you or struck you as, wow, I didn't realise it was like that?
I think the Woman of the North one was particularly impactful, just because, and that touched on lots of different areas and aspects that shape a woman's life, and it was just having it all on one page is always quite shocking. And things like in terms of the amount of unpaid care that women provide and the cost that would be, if they were paid for that at like a minimum wage level, it's huge numbers. And it's the same for the aging report. I think a lot of the time you might not think about it in a huge amount of detail until you see it all down there, and you're just like, this isn't fair. Where you live shouldn't dictate how you age, how you experience life. So it's consistently quite shocking to me, I think, when we do these things. But I think it's important because I work in this space, so I'm more aware of it than a lot of people, but there's so many people who won't be. And it's great that when we do launch these reports and you speak to people and they're just like, gosh, I just was not aware of the scale of these issues, and the difference that could be made if certain policies were implemented in terms of short-term results and longer-term stuff, especially from my perspective as a woman and a mum, and thinking about future generations and what my children should experience and what I want for them and for everyone else. It makes you feel like you're doing a good thing, and you want to keep kind of shouting about it because it's important.
Yeah, you are kind of really genuinely making a difference through your work. Is that how you feel? Is that something you take with you?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like I've worked in comms for quite a while now, and I've got something from every client I've worked with. I've learned something, but to work for an organisation where you feel like you're really striving to make a difference to something, and it's the long game. These things don't happen overnight, but seeing these small wins or more people kind of supporting you, and just all these things could make such a huge difference. And we're one of many voices who are shouting about this, but that's great. You want to be part of that chorus, because it's the more voices, the more likely we are to see change. And I think an example of that was a recent analysis that we put out on the PIP, personal independence payments, and it was the academics from Health Equity North looked at the impact of that on local economies at constituency level. So how much would be lost from each constituency as a result of these changes. So it's saying obviously it's going to have a huge impact from the people who would be losing this support, but also it's going to have a wider knock-on effect for the local economies. And that was, they turned that research around incredibly quick. We did the report incredibly quick. We did the comms really fast and got that out because we knew that there was debates and votes happening in government soon, and that had a really strong impact in a short amount of time. And obviously last week there's a U-turn on the welfare plan, so that feels like a real win that we feel like we were part of in that report, because lots of MPs were engaged with that report and they cited it, and my colleague Alexis was dealing, has kind of made sure that landed on everyone's desks. And that feels like, when things like that happen, you feel like, oh, we can make a difference, and it is really important work that's happening that could change people's lives.
That's really interesting, and doing it at that kind of constituency level gives you another lever to pull, because when we talked about media before, you tend to think kind of nationally or potentially regionally, but you could get really granular with some of your media campaigns as well, I guess.
Absolutely, and that's so key. That's something that we always ask of our academics as well. If on certain reports, if there is data that we can whittle down to local authority level that we can share with journalists, so then they can do their own data mining to pull out extra bits that's relevant to their audiences, it makes a huge impact on regional coverage. And we know that those regional titles love to have that, because it just makes it more relevant to their audiences. So that is something that we'll always ask for, and that obviously made a big difference for the media coverage, and as well from the MP's perspective, because it was very relevant to each MP's patch. So it was, it kind of hit both sides in terms of the media and the policy side.
You've spoken about that element, looking at it from a regional perspective. Are there any other kind of tips you would give people who were embarking on something like as major as maybe putting a white paper into play that they wanted to get some coverage and MP engagement from? My
advice would be early engagement and giving media a heads up is really valuable, just so they know that it's coming. They can put it in their planning diaries, and it just gets it on their radar early, and it gives an opportunity for them to ask questions quite early doors. So I always try to give them a heads up at least kind of a few weeks in advance and give an overview of top line key findings, so we can say this is the kind of thing that we're working with, subject to change. Or sometimes I'll share an early draft with close media contacts, so they can have sight of that. I think that's really important for getting it on their radar and getting them to put something in the diary, so that kind of almost secures a spot, and then working with them to find out what they need. They did want to do it to make this as good and as strong as possible, and supporting where you can. And I think that lived experience is a big element. So anything that you do that's based on data and research, always think about the reality for the people, and try and work that into it.
You've spoken about how a change of government and the PIPs one being a good example can kind of shift political momentum. How do you keep the momentum going, keeping pushing things forward? I mean, you've done one report. Is that it, or do you go back to it to kind of give it another boost at a later date?
That it very much depends on the reports, but a lot of the work we do, it can start with that report, but then it'll keep going. So right. So the Child of the North reports, there's multiple reports that have covered different areas, and maybe we'll go into more detail in the next report. So that kind of continues and keeps that going. Same with Women of the North. So the first one was very much that overarching perspective of women's lives and health and the inequalities that they face. And then there's going to be more that come off the back of that focus on more specific areas within that was touched on a high level within that report. So those themes will remain, and a lot of the policy asks will continue. And my public affairs colleagues, very much the engagement from that side of thing is continuous, and it's always speaking to MPs. A lot of the time they might ask us to draft questions that they can ask. So it's that engagement continues throughout, really, and we try and weave it into. So we always go to party conferences every year. So we'll hold events. So that keeps that discussion going at that high level, which will involve our academics and the research team and lived experience people, as well as getting ministers and MPs engaged and talking about that, and mayors and things like that. So it's these themes continue throughout the year, and it's very much pushing for these key kind of policy asks that kind of weaved through a lot of our work.
And I'm guessing you're kind of politically agnostic. You don't have a particular party, but are you ever kind of is there any media pushback or skepticism that maybe you are kind of being bankrolled by, the left or the right, to get a particular message out there?
No, I can honestly say I've never experienced that. And we, when we go out to media, we go out to all media, and our spokespeople will speak on any broadcast channel from BBC to GB News. It's very much about just reaching as wider audience as possible to get the messages of our reports out there. So I've been fortunate that we've never had any pushback in that regard.
Yeah, I guess though you'll typically plan for media questioning about the reports, and what lines you're going to expect that they're going to come back to you with.
Absolutely, and we always make sure that we brief the key spokespeople. So usually it'll be our chief executive or the executive director of Health Equity North, or some of the lead academics. So we'll make sure that they're up to speed on everything that's in the report, and just giving them a heads up that they may ask questions about where this number came from, about whatever lost productivity costs, and that's fine, because these are the people who they did the kind of work on that day, so they know how to talk around that. So and it's very much about just sticking to what the report's telling us and what we want to see happen. But obviously there's been tricky questions that might come up on different different programs that people are put forward for, but it's what the work we're doing speaks for itself, and it's very clear what we're saying and what we're asking for. So I feel like they tend to navigate it quite well.
What's the biggest challenge that you face then in your role, do you think? What keeps you up at night?
What I would like to see, and I think, to be honest with you, most of the time that we engage with media, it's fine, and they give a fair representation of the work that we do. I think a lot of what we talk about around health inequalities, it's making sure that it never goes down that narrative of this personal responsibility and lifestyle choices of people in the North that are making them, experience this ill health or experience this, when really it comes down to these wider structural things that have an impact on life. So I think as long as the story we're telling shows that and says it's not, we're not blaming anyone in the North. That's not what it's about. It's not about personal choice. A lot of this is beyond people's control, and it's about what policy and government can do to support and enable the right changes from childhood to, create that cradle to grave approach to addressing the inequality and leveling the playing field across the country.
So just looking at your role as head of comms, what have you kind of taken from how to lead a small team and get the best out of them in the time that you've been doing it?
Yeah, I think listening and always being open, and I like to make sure that everyone can feel like they can shout if they feel overwhelmed, and I think creating that space where it's okay for people to ask questions, it's okay for people to get things wrong, and it's okay to say, look, there's too much going on, what can you help with? And I feel like that's key, really, in helping prioritize workload and think, what, that isn't a priority now, we can put that on the back burner for now, let's focus on X, Y and Z. I think as well, having people who, I think when you work for an organisation where you feel like morally you're doing something quite good, I feel like you kind of have that, the people who I work with have that kind of drive and that passion. And I think that really helps us gel and work as a team. And, we all knuckle down and at times of like when it's quite busy and stuff. So, and it's about giving people breathing space when we're not busy. So I think that tends to be what works well.
So you have a real sense of
it. Try to create.
Yeah, you have a real sense of a shared purpose then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one that I think I would struggle, it's something that I feel like I would want in every job that I have now, because it keeps you going, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a motivator by the sounds of it. What advice would you give to other comms professionals who want to maybe move into a more impact focused or policy influencing world?
Well, I would say do it. If that's your interest, absolutely go for it. Go for something that you feel passionately about, something that actually might mean something to you, because I think that does help with that drive and that commitment and that passion. And speak to people. I always think it's so valuable tapping up the comms community, and that's something I still do to this day. There's so many people who I work with at the Chronicle and Journal and the Sunday Sun when I was a journalist, who are now spread across all kinds of comms roles across the north. And it's kind of speak to people who are doing that, speak to people might have some experience in that, get some advice, find out what you can do, because it's then that you might find out opportunities, you can get a bit more insight into what it's like, and just take advantage of any networks that you might have.
Excellent. Great advice, I think. And so what's next for you and the team there, and any reports or campaigns that are coming up that are kind of you're particularly excited about that you can share with us?
Yeah, well, we've got 2 more reports due out imminently. We've done quite a few reports at the first half of this year. So the next report is the Child of the North, another Child of the North APPG report, which is focusing on food insecurity and obesity in the North. So that's due out in early July, and that's being launched at the next APPG meeting in London. So my colleague Alexis is going down and overseeing that. So that will be a good one. And then a few weeks later, we've got Nutrition North. So Nutrition is one of our other networks, and that's looking at nutrition across the North. So that's been in the works for a while. So that should be another really good one to get out there, and it feeds into a lot of the stuff that the child food insecurity one, so that they kind of align quite well together. And then it's very much focusing on, it'll be conference season, so we'll be doing a few events at conference, some panels and roundtables focusing on some of the reports and some of our overarching work. So that's always that's a busy one, but it's great. It's an exciting time to kind of have that face-to-face interaction with a lot of the policy side of things, and bring our members together as well to be involved in those discussions.
How much planning goes into the conference season? How early in the year do you start planning for something like that?
Yeah, well, it's my colleague Alexis leads on that, and it starts like pretty much at the start of the year. Obviously, it ramps up, but it's she's having these discussions from really early on in the year. So it's a lengthy process, and obviously, if you need to throw your hat in the ring to secure certain spaces and rooms and things like that. So it's not something that's turned around really quickly. It's a long time planning, and it's a key part and a big part of Alexis's work. So it's kind of in this phase now when we start to nail down what these events are going to look like, who's going to be involved, and then we can start doing more of the comms around that and promoting that on our socials, and then engaging with media just before we go to see who's there and who we can speak to.
Do you time reports according to that kind of sequence as well, so that they land just before a particular conference, or is there too much noise and you avoid it at that time?
No, that was our tactic last year. So the Woman of the North report was launched just a few weeks before. We did that at the start of September, and then we did a Woman of the North roundtable at conference, which was really well attended. And we had two female Northern mayors, so Kim McGuinness and Tracy Graven, and Jess Phillips as well just came along. So it was great to get a minister along to that. And yeah, it was fabulous, and it worked really well and timed really well. People have time to digest the report, understand it, engage with them so they understand what the key findings were, and then it was more dissected in more detail at that event.
It sounds like, well, you've had a phenomenally busy year to date, and we're only halfway through, but you've got some more busy weeks ahead of you. More power to you as well from our perspective. The more successful you can be, the better for all of us up here. So finally, kind of, before we wrap up, if you had one wish for media or political world, if they would cover one particular health equality, what would that be? Give more kind of space to it and do something about.
I think it would probably hark back to what I've said already. It's because health inequalities, it's vast.
Yeah.
It's, there's so much. And I think whenever people talk about health inequalities, certainly from the regional disparity perspective, I think it's, as long as for any external coverage like that, I just think as long as the narrative doesn't focus around any kind of lifestyle or personal choices and focuses more on the wider social determinants of health and how that impacts how the lives that people have, I think that's the right focus, and that's what we want to talk about, is how you make those changes that have that impact as people go from childhood to adulthood.
Well, Ruth, thank you so much for your time today, and keep doing the good work, because it's really good for all of us. That more power to you. So thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to PR in the Real World. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast and leave us a quick review. Your support really helps spread the word and reach more marketing and PR professionals just like you. And don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues or anyone who'd benefit from the insights we share. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for more tips, strategies and real world stories from the PR frontline.